Hi everyone. This lesson is going to focus on some problems, difficulties if you will, involved in studying human social behavior. And we're going to examine likewise some of the debates, disagreements among sociologists and other social scientists as to the most appropriate approach and focus. If you will concentrate your attention on page 7 in Study Guide 1. I've identified some of the key problems and difficulties associated with studying human social behavior. I'd like for you to focus attention on each one of these. The first is often referred to using the title, at least it has been in the past, the Hawthorne effect. Sort of the fancier title is reactivity. But the argument is that by investigating people's behavior, the presence of the researcher may very well change the behavior of the subjects. This was first recognized in a study that was done a number of years ago in the 1920s at a plant run by what was then known as Western Electric. Today we know it as General Electric. And the focus was on a particular area in the Hawthorne plant just outside of Chicago. Basically, again, the work area was referred to as the wiring bank room. And the researchers were interested in a wide variety of questions and issues, one being worker productivity. And they more or less hypothesized that if they made certain improvements, such as improving lighting, improving ventilation, and likewise perhaps increasing break time, that this would have a positive reaction on the part of the workers and they would produce more. And sure enough, when they engaged in these activities, that's exactly what happened. Then they decided, let's cut back. Let's cut back on ventilation. Make the room really stuffy. Then let's follow that up with cutting back on illumination, where it might be very difficult for the workers to really see what they're doing. And then why don't we just cut out break time altogether? Now, the assumption was that these quote-unquote negative changes would reduce worker productivity. But fascinatingly enough, each time that they engaged in these negative activities, worker productivity went up. Now think about that for a moment. What's going on? Common sense would lead you to believe that's not what they should have done. But as it turns out, the workers really enjoyed the attention they were receiving from the researchers. Some of them really wanted to please the researchers, give them what they thought the researchers were looking for. So the act of investigation can possibly change the behavior of the subjects or the participants. Now, number two, we humans aren't inanimate objects. We're not rock strata. We're not the remains of a prehistoric campsite. People can't be subjected to the same research approach as something that is inanimate. That could violate ethical principles, ethics having to do with what's right and what's wrong. Third, the causes of human social behavior are frequently varied and complex. I suspect most of you would agree with that when you think about why do you do anything that you do? It's very difficult sometimes to reduce it to just one factor. We are, after all, multifaceted in terms of how we behave, and it's almost impossible. Certainly it's very difficult to isolate and identify all of the variables involved. And it's likewise difficult, particularly for social scientists like sociologists, to conduct their research in the same way that natural scientists do. For example, it might be very difficult, if not downright impossible, to study people in a controlled lab setting. Fourth, sociologists are human beings. They're actually a part of what's being studied. Think about what was just mentioned a moment ago. Human social behavior is influenced by lots of variables. why people behave the way they do is at least in part influenced by the context in which the behavior occurs. If that's true, then behavior may vary according to the context. How would you behave, speak, depending upon the context? For example, do you behave and speak at a funeral in the same way that you would at a party? And then finally, number 5, sociology is a very young discipline. Some people give the birth date as 1842, when Auguste Comte kind of coined the term sociology. And it is today characterized by a variety of approaches, and there is a lot of ongoing debate as to what the orientation of the study should be. Now, if you will pay attention to some of the information that's found on pages 10 and 11 in your study guide, you might remember that in an earlier lesson, we focus on the fact that there are sociologists who argue that the focus of their discipline should be scientific in nature. But if you're going over to the 11th page of your study guide, I want you to become aware of the fact that there are 2 other approaches that are noted by some sociologists: interpretive and critical. Now, although these are different, at the same time, I want you to bear in mind that none of them are exclusive. Some researchers may emphasize one over the other 2, yet many researchers are going to, again, base their topic, their issue, their question by employing in some form or fashion 2 or perhaps all 3 of these approaches. Now I want you to review what's included on the study guide, again on pages 10 and 11, with respect to each of these approaches. Be alerted to the fact that the scientific approach really argues that human societies are orderly systems, very much in the same way that the universe is. There's as McShonis puts it, there's an object reality out there that literally, again, human societies can be carefully studied. The critical approach, on the other hand, argues that society isn't an orderly system. Rather, the hallmark of human societies is inequality, some people having more valued resources than others. And the reality is that some categories of people have more valued resources than others, and therefore can dominate others. On the other hand, the interpretive approach suggests that society is, to a degree, people interpreting what's going on around them through their interactions with one another. People construct, create, define a reality based upon the meanings that they attach to everything. Now, each of these approaches is also distinguished by different notions as to what should be or what is the most appropriate way to conduct research. Likewise, the 3 disagree as to the goals of the research, that is, what those goals should be. So if you look at the scientific back on page 10, highlight the fact again that it advocates an approach that one of the early founders of the discipline, Auguste Comte, referred to as positivism. The researcher should be unbiased and objective. He's got to be, or she's got to be, value-free. This is also a research approach that focuses on empirical data, specifically quantitative. Remember, numbers. And the idea behind all of this is that it's certainly possible to identify scientific laws that are involved in human social life. The critical approach, on the other hand, argues that the researcher should be or has to be an activist, an advocate for change, rather than a detached and objective observer. Furthermore, critical sociology emphasizes that research is to be aimed at understanding, analyzing human social life in order to bring about greater equality, to bring about change. The interpretive approach really suggests or it emphasizes that the researcher's got to get involved. He or she has to become a participant so as to better appreciate and understand those that he or she happens to be studying. The focus here is not on crunching numbers, but upon qualitative information as to how people interpret, that is to say, make sense of the social world. So this is going to require the researcher to more or less go out and live among them. Attempt to understand events, circumstances, behaviors, etc. from the perspective of the subjects themselves. Another one of the early founders of sociology, Max Weber, labeled this as verstehen, to understand. So keep in mind again that there is ongoing debate and disagreement as to exactly what should be the heart and soul of the discipline. This is what adds, as far as I'm concerned, a lot of special qualities to sociology. Speaking personally, I really hope this debate is ongoing because it invigorates the discipline. Until next time.